You never think it will happen to you. Friends go through the pain of divorce for one reason or another. But because you trust and love your partner, you never believe that you will become another statistic, another failed marriage. But when you look at divorce statistics, especially in the modern era, I wonder why people get married in the first place. The song "Till Death Do Us Part" certainly sounds hollow, its meaning lost over the decades. I guess I should have recognized the signs, but not through what I read online, whether it be stories, articles, or just being more observant. When you are in love with someone, you tend to view the world through a rose-colored prism. When you're married, have children, a home, and a life together, the thought of growing old together is jarring. But apparently the signs were there, and I had seen them before. I grew up in a home that was eventually labeled a single-parent family. Growing up, my parents' marriage seemed strong. They seemed to love and respect each other. My father worked hard. The physically demanding work took a lot out of him. But he loved his wife and family and sacrificed himself for what I guess you could call the greater good. My mother went back to work as soon as my younger sister went to school. As a child, we had no idea what was going on. But looking back, I soon recognized some of the signs, and that's when I figured it all out. She didn't start having an affair right away. I was a teenager when it started. My brother was about 18 months younger, and my younger sister was 3 years younger. It started the way many romances start. First it was working late. Then the business trips. Showers as soon as she got home from an afternoon spent with her lover. She dressed much better than she had ever dressed for our father. And since this was before smartphones, the secret phone calls and disappearances of my mother at odd times for her connections. The only reason my father found out about their affair was because he walked in on them. I later learned that he had finished work early, hoping to surprise my mother by taking her out for an afternoon, who told him she was taking a half day to do her hair and go shopping. Instead, he arrived home and found her car in the driveway and a car next to it that he admitted he recognized. He parked on the street and walked home, entering through the back door. Walking into the bedroom, he found his wife, my mother, being entertained by her boss. In the marital bed, my father lost his temper and heard him. His name was Jim Thompson, and he ended up crawling out of our house bruised. What my father quickly learned was that adultery meant absolutely nothing in a country where no-fault divorce was the norm. Some people argue that possession is 9/10 of the law. My father tried to kick her out of the house, pack her things, and send her to my parents. When they found out what she had done, they wanted nothing to do with her. Her sister also refused to take her in. Since the house was in her name and also in my father's name, she refused to move in. My father was caught between a hammer and anvil. If he had stayed, divorce would have been impossible. A husband and wife must live apart for 12 months, that is, live in different places, before a divorce can be granted. My father tried to evict my mother more than once because of her adultery, but it was not a crime, and she had every right to stay in the house. Yes, sometimes no-fault divorces suck because in the case of adultery, there is a guilty party who caused the divorce, and for them to leave the marriage without getting punished for breaking their vows seems a bit unfair. My father eventually gave up, not wanting to stay in the same house with his cheating wife. He found an apartment and moved out. He couldn't find a place large enough to accommodate all three of us, so we were left to live with my mother. I guessed what was going on and immediately let my mother know what I thought of her. She tried to explain her reasons, but I told her I was going to go live with my father as soon as I could. My little brother and little sister had not been told anything, so they just wondered why my father had left. I tried to explain everything to them without getting into the conversation. The only good thing my mother had done during that year was to keep our visits with my father going. For the first couple months, he was broken. He tried his best to make a happy face for his kids, but even we could see that the smile was forced. Being the oldest, he sat me down at the table one night after my siblings had gone to bed and confessed that we were the only reason he was sticking around. But he would fight for custody and try to get a home if possible. It was a pipe dream, though. In those days, men were rarely granted custody, and when it came to divorce after 12 months of separation, it required them to go to court to resolve custody and other issues. When I became old enough to appear in court, I emphatically stated that I wanted to live with my father. But because my brother and sister were considered too young to make that decision, even though the judge would take their word for it, custody of all three of us was awarded to my mother. The only silver lining for my father is that there is no alimony in Australia, although there is such a thing as spousal maintenance. However, it is not always awarded, and since our mother was earning well anyway, he only had to pay reasonable alimony. Unlike in the United States, in Australia child support is reasonable for the parent who is no longer in the household, so my father would not be left destitute because of child support payments. The next 4 years were difficult. I already despised my mother, and she knew it. To any man she tried to introduce as her new partner, I made it clear that my mother was a whore who cheated on her husband, forcing him to leave the family home. More than once I left her in tears. By the time I was 16, we barely spoke, and I left the house as often as possible, for school, for a part-time job, or just not showing up. After the divorce, my father did get his life together, and eventually met a beautiful woman named Naomi, his fellow divorcee. I supported their relationship, and she soon came to love his 3 children as her own. She had a daughter of her own, and we treated her like a sister. Despite the heartache, I was glad my father had found love again, even though I knew he was hesitant to marry. Naomi seemed to realize this and happily agreed to cohabitate. Eventually they rented a house together and established a de facto relationship. As soon as I turned 18 and graduated from high school, I moved out of my father's house. I hated leaving my siblings, the only reason I stayed in the house until that age. But by then, my relationship with my mother had become unacceptable. My last words to her were, I'll admit, incredibly cruel, but it was just an explosion of all the negative thoughts I'd been holding inside me since my father had been forced to leave home, simply because he didn't want to stay married to a cheating whore. Despite the collapse of our relationship, she still sobbed as I packed my car on the day I left. I hugged my brother and sister, assuring them that I would be there for them and would not forget them, and then took one last look at my mother. The experience with my mother made me wary when it came to dealing with women. I had read many articles about infidelity and knew that I was a monogamous person at heart and would expect the same from any partner. I had a couple girlfriends in high school, but once I started working and making money, I started dating, hoping that I would find a woman worthy of my love and trust. I met Kylie when I was 21 years old. She was a recent university graduate. I was working as an engineer and taking night classes because although I enjoyed working with my hands, I was hoping to work my way up in the organization to a management position. I met her at one of the corporate gigs representing an engineering company, and she was working part-time as a sales rep for a supply company. We hit it off immediately, and by the end of the day, I had her number in my phone with a promise to call her. Hot date, Mark? My roommate asked. He was one of my best high school buddies, and we'd agreed to live together so the rent and bills would be cheaper. Something like that, Dave. Is this the girl you met at the conference? Yeah. Finally got up the courage to call her? I looked at him and smirked. Back off, Dave. I just waited a couple days so I wouldn't seem too pushy. Trust me, she was pretty excited on the phone when I called her and was anxious to meet up as soon as possible. After applying some aftershave, I decided I looked pretty good. Better than looking like a bum. Anyway, although I had a decent job, the money still wasn't great, but I felt comfortable enough. We agreed to meet at one of the bars in town, and from there, it was a case-by-case basis. I didn't usually organize dinner and drinks on first dates. Too many stories of women looking for a free meal, and the man who paid for it never hearing about it again. Walking into the bar after I parked the car, she was sitting on a stool. She was already sipping her drink, meeting my gaze across the room, when her eyes lit up and she smiled. My heart seemed to beat faster. Over a couple of drinks, we gradually got to know each other. She admitted that her role in the corporation was temporary, and that she was only hired because she had a pretty face and that attracted men in her direction. She laughed, admitting that it was true, but it made her feel like a piece of meat. And so many married men hit on me, she added. It was disgusting. I realized what she was getting at. I know my own mother cheated, but both sexes were equally bad when it came to cheating. Out of my own curiosity, I looked up statistics online, and the fact that so many men and women admitted to having extramarital affairs shocked me. Making matters worse was the fact that, according to many articles written in Australia, we were notoriously known as a bunch of cheating scumbags. You were the perfect gentleman, Mark, she added, taking my hand in hers. You kept looking me in the eye the whole time and remained completely professional. At least until you asked for my number. You were the only sincere person. I wish you were single, though. I put my hand over my heart and raised my other hand. I swear I'm single. Ask any of my friends. She smiled and took my hand again. Good, because I have a good feeling about you. I've already been hurt. We agreed to take things slow. The first couple weeks we met for coffee or drinks. At the end of the third night over drinks, we had our first kiss. By then she already knew about my parents' relationship. She hugged me tightly, and for some reason I felt better in my heart. When we kissed, I immediately knew it was the right thing to do. When I met her gaze, I sensed she was thinking the same thing. Drinks turned into dinner. A week later, she returned to the apartment I shared with Dave. He had a girlfriend of his own and spent most of his time at her place, so thankfully he wasn't there. After one last drink together, I took her hand and we made love for the first time. A month later, she confessed her love to me. I reciprocated, and things went on from there. Once she found a steady job, we started talking about serious things like living together, buying a house, marriage, and then children. By this point, even though what had happened to my father was on my mind, Kylie had already won my heart, and that was all that mattered. She was a pleasure to be around, and she admitted that she wanted to be a wife and mother above all else. Before we got married, we agreed to buy a house together. Fortunately, this was before the housing boom that was sweeping Australia, especially Sydney. However, due to lack of employment and a bad credit history, which she told me about, she could not co-borrow on the mortgage. I couldn't afford such a mortgage myself, nor would any bank offer it to me on my own. So my father suggested I become a co-borrower so that his salary would supplement my own. I had no idea how much it would save my ass in the future, but at the moment Kylie was very grateful to him and almost wept when he told her she was just another daughter. At the same time, her parents absolutely loved me, so when I popped the question just 3 months after moving into our new home, everyone was thrilled when we announced our engagement and wedding date. Marrying Kylie was the best day of my life up to that point. I married the woman I thought I was my soulmate, and she often told me I was hers. Walking down the aisle towards her, I was probably grinning like a fool. She started giggling when I took her hand, and we were both happy that we had finally committed to each other. It wasn't a church wedding, it was in a park with a marquee nearby to hold the reception. Our honeymoon lasted a week on an island in the Pacific. Sun, sea, sand. Not surprisingly, we found out that was when she became pregnant with our first child. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl 9 months after our honeymoon and was ready for another child 6 months after giving birth. 18 months later, she gave birth to our son. 3 months later, we decided that 2 was enough. We both had what we wanted. To my surprise, she didn't want me to have surgery in case we changed our minds, and she didn't want her tubes tied either. She just agreed to go back on birth control since it had never bothered her before, and life went on as usual. She was a housewife and mother until both children went to school. As soon as our son went to school, she resumed working, but kept her work hours to school hours until both children went to middle school. Only then did she return to full-time employment. By the time we were both 45, I was already working as a regional manager for a national network of engineering companies. I traveled often, but rarely stayed home more than one night. Kylie had a career in real estate and ran her own office, although she occasionally traveled to the main office in the CBD. Our daughter Charlotte left home to live with her boyfriend. He was a lovely young man who was already committed to her. I assumed wedding bells were looming on the horizon. Our son Stephen was still in university and living in an apartment near campus. I was aware of his various interests, but Kylie and I supported him regardless of his life choices. By this time, we had been married for over 20 years. I felt like we still loved each other, just like the day we exchanged vows. I never took my eyes off him. Putting my hand on my heart, I could look at another woman, but I never thought about doing anything since I had given my heart to Kylie and didn't want to break that trust. But I couldn't help myself. What happened to my father was always in the back of my mind. I should have known better. I should have seen the signs. But when I finally realized the truth, I knew I had to take certain steps to prepare for the inevitable. You just never think it will happen to you. You think she's cheating on you? Asked Dave, hearing the surprise in his tone. Buddy, she loves you to death. Why on earth? I was blind, Dave. I thought that once Steve left home, our relationship would go back to the way it was. but I'm starting to notice that she's acting the way my mother acted with my father. Just thinking about that slut made my blood boil. I had hardly seen her in the last 20 years. She had been present at my wedding, but only because of my father's intervention. He married Naomi by then and had long since retired. He told me to be a better man and invite her. I didn't have to invite her, but not inviting her would make me look like the bad guy. I gritted my teeth and sent her the invitation. Other than texting her about her grandchildren, whom she rarely got to visit, I had nothing to do with her. Kylie knew this and never insisted on having any kind of relationship with her either. So what are you going to do? Gather all the evidence I can, and if she's cheating on me, just leave her. How will you do that? I have ways and means. The last few months, she's been more secretive than usual. I should have noticed it sooner. It's my own fault, but it's what I got for trusting her. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to stop, so I prepared for the inevitable. Monday morning, I have a meeting with a private investigator. All I want to know is if she's been doing dirty deeds. I don't need photos and videos, though anything that will help my case. Too bad you can't get a divorce in this damn country on the grounds of adultery. That's true, but a man can defend himself if he's smart and defends himself early enough. Fortunately, she waited until the kids were out of the house before she cheated. And there are one or two things she's forgotten about in our lives that could turn the situation in my favor. He patted my shoulder. I'm sorry, buddy. I really am. I sipped my beer. Me too. The thing is, until I get confirmation, I can't stop loving her. Maybe it's just my suspicious mind. Maybe I'm just a jealous bastard. But the signs are there, buddy. I wasn't paying attention until I finally realized what was going on. The next morning, I drove to my father's house. Naomi greeted me as she always did, asking if she could sit with him while I explained the situation. I must have had that look on my face because even though it was only 10 a.m., he put a bottle of beer in my hand and told me to take my time before he started. I smiled as he took Naomi's hand. They still loved each other as much as they did on their wedding day. The actual relationship didn't last long before my father wanted her to be his wife. I think Kylie is having an affair. Naomi sighed. My father muttered, "Shit, not again. I'll hire a private investigator on Monday." But all the signs are there, Dad. The same signs you told me about, Mom. All the signs you told me about. If she's cheating, she must have read a book on how to get away with it. But once I pulled my head out of my ass, and what do you want me to do? I grinned. Naomi giggled as I'm sure the smile was not a pleasant one. Daddy, I'm going to give my house to you. Remember when you signed the mortgage agreement years ago? Kylie never put her name on the contract. Legally, you and I own the property. And when I'm gone, she will be considered nothing more than a tenant. I'm selling you the house as a gift by simply removing my name from the deed. Under state and federal law, I can do it for free. Then what do we do? I sign a month-to-month lease with you. Once I dissolve our marriage, if it comes to that, you can settle things with Kylie. While she will have some tenant rights since she has been living in this house for a long time, we will go over how you can legally evict her if necessary by court order. Unfortunately, because of the plan I have in my head, I won't be around. Have you thought this through, Mark? Inquired Naomi. Kylie and I discussed monogamy and fidelity before we got married. She knows about my mother. I warned her that if she ever cheated on me, I wouldn't forgive her. I don't care if it's once or 100 times. If you sleep with someone else, you're breaking our vows, which means you're breaking the prenup. At least with this no-fault crap, I can walk away easily, and I won't pay her a dime. No alimony since they don't live at home, and no spousal support since she makes as much as I do. Thank God we don't have these damn alimony laws like some states. Screw giving some cheating bitch a portion of my paycheck just because she can't keep her legs closed. I took a sip of my beer and looked at Naomi. Sorry, I'm a little pissed off about that. I hope I'm wrong. Back home, Kylie was sitting in the living room, curled up on the couch, watching a movie. She smiled at me as always, her eyes lighting up at my appearance. Where have you been? She inquired. Meeting with my dad. Just needed some advice about something. About what? About a job. There might be a new opportunity on the horizon. The problem was that I only had suspicions, no concrete evidence that she was doing me nasty things. And if she was having an affair, it was with someone she didn't see every day. I knew that the day the girls' nights out would start out of the blue would be one of the straws that broke the camel's back. But so far, nothing like that had happened. There were times she'd stay late at work, but I had enough of that. If she was suspicious, she'd think I was cheating on her on those rare nights I worked late. Going to bed, she snuggled up to me as always and whispered how much she loved me. It hurt me to think that she was lying to me. Maybe she loved me, but she needed something or someone new. If so, we would get divorced and she could get a new guy. I've read fictional stories about wives who for some reason turned into huge sluts and did terrible things. The thought of my beautiful wife participating in such things almost gave me a gag reflex. But the thought of her breaking our vows was too unbearable at times. The next day was Monday. I went to work first. Every morning we had breakfast together, then I brushed my teeth. It was exactly the same that morning. Her eyes were shining as she told me she loved me and wished me a good day. I almost felt guilty knowing that at lunchtime, I would be meeting with a private investigator ready to set up surveillance on my wife because I believed she was cheating on me after 20 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. I was a little surprised to be greeted by a woman. I expected to see an ex-cop with a dislike of women, dressed in a trench coat and fedora. I guess I watched too many old movies. She noticed my surprise and, smiling, explained the process, what was being offered and how much it would cost. Will she notice the money moving around? No, we have separate accounts, but there is a joint account where we pay bills and other household things. What makes you think she's having an affair? I explained what I had seen my mother do, then what my father discovered, which my mother then admitted, and then explained the current situation. How is your sex life going? She finally asked. Once my son left home it was cool, but about 6 months ago it slowed down again. I thought it was just us putting it out of our minds. To tell you the truth, I'd have intimacy with my wife every damn night if I could. Just because I'm 45 doesn't mean I'm not interested in it anymore. Have you noticed changes in her behavior? Yes, they're barely noticeable, but they're there. You know the term red flags? She nodded and I grinned. Not quite enough for a communist parade, but enough red flags to make me uneasy and suspicious. She explained what they had to offer. These include phone tapping, video surveillance, identity tracking, and all sorts of activities, some of which she admitted might not stand up to scrutiny, meaning they would be considered somewhat illegal. I had to explain that it wasn't a permanent affair unless my head was buried in the sand. I had no idea if she was seeing someone on her lunch break, working late, or just occasionally hooking up when she just wanted some other feeling. I had to admit that I just didn't know, and wanted to know the truth. I was given some time to think about it, and was informed that I would call on Friday to begin surveillance starting early the following week. It was hard to give up sex with my wife. I still didn't know the truth, but the thought of sharing her with one or more men now made me completely uncomfortable. I could have pretended to be sick, but I told the truth. I just wasn't interested. I know what upset her when I rejected her advances. Eventually she asked if I was stressed about work. I was preoccupied with something, so I guess her curiosity was satisfied. She snuggled up to me as always and whispered that she loved me. I called Wednesday and asked them to start immediately. I needed to know as this was starting to drive me crazy. I couldn't help but wonder if it was all in my head. No wonder so many spouses who have been cheated on have been mentally traumatized. In the end, although I paid for their services and they found the evidence, it only took a month of fighting back for my wife to finally show herself in all her glory. By this time, I was reading literature every day about cheating spouses, whether male or female, all the signs of infidelity, how they pull the wool over their eyes, and what spouses can do when a marriage breaks down. I was already prepared. I had already started moving things into the car, and I had what is called an evacuation bag. The workers knew I was getting ready to move. I just needed to give them a date. Our house was now my father's, and there was no mention of my wife in the lease. With any luck, she'd be kicked out of the house within a couple months. It was Friday evening. I got home at the usual time. When I walked in the door, Kylie was usually in the living room watching TV and sipping a glass of wine. We'd usually order takeout, talk about our week, maybe discuss weekend plans, snuggle up to each other, and then head to the bedroom. Before she started acting differently, Friday night was usually a great night when the kids finally left the house. We made love all the time, sometimes barely stopping until Sunday, but instead I heard her busy in the bathroom. I almost laughed to myself. The situation was so cliched that I grabbed a beer from the kitchen and then settled down on the couch. You never think it's going to happen to you. I waited in the pitch darkness for her to appear. I expected to see a lecherous little black dress. Instead, she wore a motley blouse, a short skirt, stockings, and heeled shoes. She had styled her hair, applied makeup, jewelry, accentuated everything. She was simply stunning. Too bad it wasn't for me. I didn't realize it right away. Oh, Mark, I didn't know you were home. I got home at my usual time, Kylie. You've obviously been too busy primping and prepping for whatever it is you're doing. Where are you going? She took a deep breath. I'm going on a date tonight, Mark. With John from work. Why? It's just for work. It was a brazen lie. I knew who he was. He was an affair partner. He worked at the head office of her company. He was married and had children about the same age as both of us. I'm not sure what she expected me to say, but there comes a point when a man just washes his hands of a man. If she expected me to beg or plead, she obviously didn't know me at all. She knew my stance on monogamy and fidelity. Standing up, she met my gaze as I approached her. I stared at her intently, and she eventually recoiled. I smiled as I made my way to the kitchen. You're not going to say anything, Mark? No. She had no idea how prepared I was. I guess we were both good actors. The only difference was that I wasn't tearing her heart out with lies. Okay. Fair enough. I'll be home later. We'll talk then. I didn't say anything but followed her to the door. She stopped and looked back at me, looking as unsure as I'd ever seen her. Whether it was guilt or not, I didn't know and I didn't care anymore. Good night, Mark, she said quietly. Goodbye, Kylie. She must have realized what I was trying to say, but apparently she thought I was going to be another man I'd read about who would put up with this kind of crap. But I wasn't a cuckold. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of shit. I wasn't interested in open marriage, wife splitting, and things like that. It emasculates, demeans, and completely overturns the vows made at marriage. As soon as she left, I put my plan into action. I grabbed my evacuation bag and packed another suitcase, putting them in the car. I got on the internet and thanked the heavens that in this day and age, everything can be done through a phone app or online. We had very little debt, just a credit card that I immediately paid off and canceled. I paid all upcoming bills and then transferred most of our savings from our joint account to my own. I left her with enough money to pay a month or two's rent and bills. After that, she was on her own. Possession is 9/10 of the law. She didn't own the house, and by the time she realized our savings were gone too, I would be gone. As I walked around the house one last time, I couldn't help but sigh. So many good memories now ruined. Taking another mug of beer, I had 3 calls to make. The first one would be easy. The last 2 would be the hard ones. Dad, it's confirmed. She's cheating on me. She had the nerve to admit that she's going on a date with another man tonight. The plan goes into effect from now on. Where are you going? To Adelaide. I have a new gig there for 12 months. When the divorce is final, I'll probably go back to Sydney, but that's the thing. We'll wait and see. All right, son. I'll make sure she doesn't find out where you are. New number? I'll settle it as soon as I get there. I'll send you my new address as soon as I find a place to live. Drive carefully and don't do anything stupid. Dad, all I'm doing is leaving a cheating spouse. Unfortunately, this time like father, like son sounds a little hollow. You haven't done anything wrong, Mark. Just find peace in what you're doing, and soon you'll move on with your life. Just know that Naomi and I love you. Do your kids know? I'll call them next time. Good luck, son. Talk to you soon. Calling my kids was the hardest call I've ever made. I called my daughter first. She will always be Daddy's little girl. When I explained the situation, she cried on the other end of the phone. That's what hardened my heart, to hear my little girl sobbing because her daddy had gotten his heart broken. I assured her that I will always love her, but for the moment I am leaving. I'll email her all my new details once I get settled, but for now I'm not going to tell anyone anything. As for my son, he has shown the stoic attitude I would expect from any young man. He called his mother a whore, and the only question he had for me was what I was going to do with him. I'm going to find out where he lives and send it to his wife, I admitted. She deserves to know the truth. Other than that, I have no desire for revenge, Steve. This isn't fiction, it's real life. I'm heartbroken right now, but all I'll do is wait for the divorce and then somehow rebuild my life. I'm only 45, 46 when the divorce happens. What about counseling? Can she demand it? Marriage isn't like ours here, and neither are the divorce laws, Steve. You've read too many stories based on states' laws. As long as we've lived apart for 12 months, I can file for divorce. Since you're both over 18, I won't even be required to attend court, although I will, just to make sure everything goes smoothly. She can't require counseling since we've been married for 20 years. Well, I'd be careful, Dad. You know how the courts can be. If she's persistent enough, then I'll just take my evidence to the counselor, put the pictures in front of them, and ask them if they'll stay married to the woman who's cheating on them. Okay, Dad. Well, take care of yourself, and keep in touch when you get to where you're going. I'll keep you in the loop as I believe Mom will be contacting me. She knows Lottie will protect you. Thank you, Steve. We'll talk soon. That was it. I wrote Kylie a short letter explaining that I was leaving, and she would hear from my father soon. I didn't give her the reason why, leaving it as a bit of a surprise. Other than that, I explained that I had already called our children and told them the truth, just like my father had. She could tell her parents that I left, but if I started getting insults or requests for reconciliation, I would send them proof. Finally, I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the coffee table, along with the note and all the proof I had received. These were copies, as I would keep the originals in case I needed to use them for any reason. Getting into the car, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I found that all the stress I had been feeling disappeared as soon as I drove away from the house. I booked a hotel on the western outskirts of the city to prepare for my trip to Adelaide. I had 2 weeks to get there and set up my life, so I took my time and decided to stay in random country towns that had no more than a pub, post office, and police station, usually all in one building. A week later, I arrived in Adelaide. I was met at the office where I was to work by several people I recognized from previous corporate conferences. I already knew my role, so knowing I was a stranger in their city, they took me outside and showed me around, recommending neighborhoods where I should live. I ended up staying in a hotel for a month while I picked a place to live. I ended up choosing a modern 3-bedroom apartment in North Adelaide after researching information and discovering that it was one of the most beautiful suburbs in the city. I wasn't interested in buying as the average price was expensive, although not as bad as Sydney. I intended to return home to Sydney after 12 months. As soon as I moved and changed my room, I informed my father, siblings, and children of the change in my circumstances. Charlotte called immediately wanting to visit me. I missed her terribly and arranged for her to fly for a month. My son was finishing his studies, but as Christmas was only 3 months away, he would visit me then as he could stay for a few weeks. As for my father, he let me know what was going on with Kylie. Are you aware that she didn't get home until the next morning? Yes. I didn't distract the private investigators until the next day as I was curious as to what she was doing that night. She went out to dinner with him, and it was all quite romantic. Then they spent the night in a hotel in the city. There was nothing else I needed to know. I thanked them for their efforts and paid them as their services were not needed after that. Well, I heard about it through the grapevine and also what she told me. When she returned home, she found your wedding ring, the note, and the evidence. She called me, your children, and her family in hysterics. You obviously didn't answer your cell phone, and I know she sent you emails. Any calls from her went to voicemail and were deleted. I marked all emails from her as spam. Well, that was just the beginning of her problems. A week later, I showed up on her doorstep and showed her the lease we signed. Then I showed her the paperwork that you had gifted me the house. Her face turned pale as she realized it was all quite legal. I gave her 3 months to find a suitable place to live, and if she doesn't leave, I'll have the police evict her. She's still living there, but I know she wants to move out. Has she asked about me? Of course. She asked about your family, your children, your friends, even where you work. She's eaten up with guilt for throwing away 20 years of our life together. Has she explained to anyone why? Not really. She's sorry, of course, but I heard the same thing from your mother. She was sorry she got caught. Not sorry she cheated on me. Cheaters always live in a fantasy world where they believe they are doing nothing wrong. The usual nonsense is that it was just sex. I never cheated on my wife for just sex. And believe me, Dad, by the time I was in my 30s and 40s, I was getting plenty of proposals. But I loved my wife and I wouldn't dare back down from my vows. I got a second chance with Naomi, Mark. Give yourself time to heal, mourn your marriage, and when you're ready, open your heart to someone else. There are millions of good women in the world, Mark. Thanks, Dad. Love you, son. Take care of yourself. Work helped me distract myself. I ended up traveling around the state of South Australia, visiting various stores and suppliers, and carving out time on the weekends to explore some of the region, particularly the Barossa Valley. I found that divorce had made me a tough negotiator, unwilling to concede an inch unless it benefited my company. At least my bosses were happy with my performance at work, and were already talking in my ear about staying in Adelaide for good. My daughter visited me a month after I moved into the apartment. While waiting for her at the airport, she screamed, "Daddy," and rushed to me. I hugged her tightly, spun her around, and she immediately cried, whispering how much I loved her back and that once this was over, I would be home again for good. She spent a week with me, and even though I was working, I spent most of my time at home, but whenever I had a spare moment, we chatted about anything that came to mind. She informed me that her mother had been flooding her with calls trying to explain her side of the story. Although I didn't want to show her the proof, I had a printed report that I finally gave in and showed her. By the time she stopped reading, she was in floods of tears and almost bellowed how much she hated her mother. This was not my intention, but despite my assurances that her mother still loved her, I had a bad feeling that it would take her a long time to forgive her mother, if she ever forgave her at all. The day she left hurt us both, as I knew she wanted to stay with me, just to keep me company. I hugged her for what seemed like hours before she needed to leave. In the months that my marriage fell apart, I never shed a tear. I was angry about it, but not upset. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried for a few minutes in the car as my daughter drove away. It made me realize that I was feeling pretty lonely, but at the same time, her visit revitalized me. I talked to her every night. My son called me at least once every couple days. My siblings knew what had happened, and my younger sister promised to visit me as soon as she could. My father kept me informed of all the happenings. Even the guys from my old office in Sydney seemed to be aware of some of the events, but usually called just to chat and laugh. It was 6 weeks before Christmas when lightning struck again. I strolled through the aisles of the nearest supermarket, writhing in boredom. Kylie and I always went grocery shopping together. We laughed at each other, acting goofy, and it was always an enjoyable activity. I reached for a bottle of salad dressing, not noticing the woman reaching for the same bottle. Our hands collided, and we both turned and stared at each other. I'm pretty sure my jaw dropped slightly, and her cheeks immediately colored. "I'm sorry," I said. "No, it's my fault. I didn't notice you. Please take the bottle. I can get something else." "I can't take it. It's the last one." I don't know where I got the confidence in what I said next. "Tell you what, you'll take the bottle if you have coffee with me afterward." I had no idea who she was, or what her name was, or anything else, but that touch lit a spark in me, and just the sheer beauty of her face made me want to get to know her better. I held out my hand. Mark." She smiled, taking my hand and feeling how soft her skin was. "I'm Jennifer. Do you often pick up women in supermarkets, Mark?" "No, you're the first." "And you're sure I'm not married?" "If you're not, I'll withdraw my invitation. If yes, I hope you'll say yes." She was a brunette with hair almost to her shoulders. Her bright blue eyes were protected by a pair of thin-rimmed black glasses perched on a small nose. Her lips were full but real, and her face was classically beautiful. I had no idea of her age. I wanted to examine her otherwise, but held back even though I guessed she was 6 inches shorter than me. I don't know what she thought of me in response, but judging by her smile, she liked what she saw. "I'd like to get some coffee. Why don't you give me your number?" Giving her my number, she sent me a text. "I'll be done shopping in about half an hour, then I'll need to take this home to put it away. But I can meet you in a couple hours if you want." "Are you local?" "Yes. I live nearby." "Do you?" "Same. I hate driving too far just to go grocery shopping. Let me know where you are, and I'll meet you there." Pushing the cart forward, she placed a hand on my forearm. "I'll see you soon, Mark. It's been too long since I've had a date at a coffee shop." I heard the tone and met her gaze. I saw the pain in them, as I saw the same expression in my own eyes whenever I looked in the mirror. "I'll text you when I get home, and let you know where I'll be." After doing the rest of my shopping, I took advantage of the self-service and practically rushed home, throwing everything in the fridge and cabinets before showering and changing. Before I left, I sent Jennifer a text, asking if she liked the nearby coffee shop I'd grown to love since moving into the neighborhood. She replied a couple minutes later, admitting that she frequents the same store quite often, and asked if we'd seen each other before. Admittedly, I was a little nervous waiting for her to arrive. I had dated my wife during our marriage, but this was my first real date in 20 years. She walked in, overdressed, wearing an absolutely gorgeous sundress. After buying her a drink, we just got to know each other. She confided that she just marveled at my confidence in asking her out in the middle of a supermarket. She then added, "But when you touched my hand, Mark, I felt something. So it wasn't just me?" She blushed but nodded. "No. I often read about things like that, but I think it's just fantasy." She held out her hand to me, and we smiled as I closed my palm around hers. "I just felt it again," she whispered. "Definitely felt it from my side." We didn't get too deep into the story, not on a first date. I recognized her name, she was single, and she smiled as she showed me her left hand, though it was obvious there had once been a ring on the third finger. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, but she had no children of her own. She lived alone in a small apartment. She had a few close friends. Her parents lived in the city. She had a younger sister, and she was 35 years old. "Oh," I said, 45. "I don't care how old you are, Mark. All I care about is what kind of man you are." When she said that, I had to admit that I had broken up with my wife. Noticing the nervous look on her face, I sighed and asked if she wanted another drink, as some explanation would be required. I didn't want to tell her everything on our first meeting, but if it was necessary. She made me smile by saying, "No, Mark, I trust you for now. I can see that you're in pain. Is it that obvious?" I saw the same look in the mirror when he broke my heart. She took my hand again and squeezed it. "It gets easier, but at first it's just one day at a time. Then weeks and months go by, and soon the person who broke your heart will no longer matter." She smiled at me again. "And then maybe you'll meet the very person who starts to mend that very heart. It's just that some people wait longer than others, but eventually it happens. My father used to say the same thing. Your father is a wise man." We finished our second glass and walked outside. Walking to her car, I felt awkward, not knowing whether to kiss her, hug her, or just wish her well. When I hugged her, I guess we both didn't want to break the embrace. "Give me a call this week, Mark. I'd love to talk to you again. How about tonight?" She giggled, and it was a dagger to the heart. "You can call me whenever you want." I called her that night, and every night thereafter. Not wanting to interfere with her regular teacher's week, I asked if she wanted to go out to dinner Friday night. When she said she'd love to, I practically danced around the apartment as soon as I hung up the phone. I hadn't felt so giddy in a long time. At the conference on Thursday, more than one person remarked on my rather sunny disposition. Everyone knew about my breakup and impending divorce, so they immediately assumed I was seeing someone. Not wanting to jinx it, I told them that I enjoyed my date at the coffee shop and that I would be having dinner with the same person the next night. I added that I had no interest in going on dates. I went out with one woman at a time. If it didn't work out, I would try with another. The restaurant I chose had rave reviews online, but I hadn't visited it before. It was a casual dining room, but the food was supposed to be excellent. Despite the casual atmosphere, I still wore slacks rather than jeans, a long-sleeved button-down shirt, a pair of leather shoes, and some cologne, although stubble was kept to a minimum. The restaurant had a bar, and I smiled when Jennifer was already there waiting for me. She looked incredibly nervous. Noticing my approach, she stood up, and without thinking, I leaned in to kiss her. She immediately kissed me back. "Wow," she whispered, pulling away from me. "If you're only going to greet me like that on our second date, I wanted to do it at the end of our first." A waiter approached us to take us to our seats. Luckily, we got a small semicircular booth so we could sit side by side. After ordering our drinks, we chatted about our weeks. It was impossible not to notice how passionate she was about teaching. But when she confessed that she wanted to have children of her own, I started talking about mine. I think we were both annoyed when the waiter came back and asked about our order, as it disrupted the conversation. We agreed to split the appetizer and dessert, with everyone getting the main course. I was amazed at how easily the conversation flowed. I was mesmerized by her face, her voice, Her mannerisms. I'm sure she caught my eyes more than once as she blushed each time. The food was excellent, no complaints, and the waiters and waitresses were attentive, but not too intrusive. I paid after dinner, although she suggested we go to Holland's before I asked if she wanted another drink. She immediately agreed. I took her hand and led her to a bar I'd looked up online. It was a quiet place, a man at a piano playing background music. There were more booths here. Jennifer was enjoying a cocktail, and I was enjoying a bourbon with a mixer. What's wrong, Mark? She finally asked. I told her everything. How we'd met. About our life together. Our children. Our careers. But then I explained what happened to my father. About my relationship with my mother not working out. Their divorce and what I learned. Then I gradually realized that my wife was doing the same thing. Then I confessed how I left. What I had done a few weeks before all of this. I'm still married, Jennifer, but we live apart. I moved here to make sure the divorce goes through. I'm not sure if you would consider what I'm doing cheating or not. I won't blame you if you do. But my marriage is over. It exists in name only. I will return to Sydney to make sure the divorce is finalized. And if you met someone here, then I'd talk to him about our options. My children are in Sydney. Being so far away from them is hard. I had to look away as admitting it upset me. I miss them every day. My ex-husband was quite a piece of work, Mark. He swept me off my feet when I was 19. He was 25 at the time. The age difference didn't bother me, but my parents warned me about him. But I was in love and didn't listen to them. I didn't notice the red flags that showed up after a couple months. I was surprised he let me go to work, but that was all I was allowed to do. Slowly but surely, he isolated me from family and friends. I was expected to teach school, and then come home and practically become his maid and whore. She paused as I felt in my gut that this was only the beginning of the story. I suppose it was worse from there. I talked back to him, which means I was disrespectful to my husband. I was dressing like a whore, or coming home late. That means I was cheating. I was spending money on things I wanted. That meant I was financially irresponsible. He never said anything positive. He was a sea of absolute negativity. I can't imagine wanting to say anything good about you, Jennifer, I said softly. I knew I needed to get away. He was crazy, and I knew that one day he would either hit me and put me in the hospital or just destroy me. I called my father and cried into the phone, asking him to save me. He arrived with 2 of my uncles and a few of his friends. My ex-husband tried to fight them off, but pushing and hitting a woman is different than fighting off a man, or a man, since my father cleared his watch with 1 punch, and then they tied him to a chair while they helped me move out. I immediately went to the police, got a restraining order and an AWO against him. I've been divorced for 7 years, and he doesn't know where I am. I've barely dated Mark. I've been afraid for so long. She raised her eyes and looked into mine. Then I met you, and I had feelings I hadn't felt in so long. I'd never felt them for him. She got behind the wheel, but it wasn't safe to drive, so I offered to drive her home. Stopping in front of an apartment building, I realized I had considered it before choosing my current residence. After escorting her inside, she opened the front door and hesitated. I made my decision, pulled her to me and kissed her again. I had a wonderful night, Jennifer. I'd like to spend it again. During the week? Any night you want. I'm a pretty good cook in the kitchen if you like to have dinner with me. Let me know the night, and I'll bring something too. I'm a pretty good cook myself. She smiled. Well, I'll cook first, and then you cook for me, and we'll compare results. What night? Wednesday, Mark, although I'm expecting your usual nightly call. And lots of messages. If you play your cards right, you might even get a surprise or 2 in a message. What are you doing tomorrow? Nothing. Why don't we go to the beach? You just want to see me in a bikini. Huh, no, just want to have a good time. When I got home, I heard my phone beep a couple times and didn't open it until I was inside and sitting on the couch with a beer in my hand. I had a great night, Mark. I wanted you to spend the night with me, but I don't want to rush things. I don't want to rush things either. When you're here Wednesday night, bring a change of clothes. I want you to stay, but it's too early for anything but sleeping in the same bed, Mark. I'm tired. I'm tired of sleeping alone, Jennifer. I am too. I'm already in bed. It's royal, but it feels empty. It didn't feel that way until I met you. I'll pick you up at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'll take you out for breakfast first, and then we'll go to the beach. J. What's your favorite color? M. Usually blue. On a woman, black or red. J. Then I have the perfect bikini for you. I'll see you in the morning, Mark. M. Sweet dreams. Beautiful. The last message was a love heart. Stopping the next morning outside her apartment complex, she hopped at me. I knocked on the door and heard her calling me inside. She smiled at me. What do you say? Do you have a broom? I'll have to fight off all the men. Her smile widened and she disappeared, returning in a t-shirt and shorts. Grabbing her bag, I put it in the trunk of the car next to mine and drove her to a beachside cafe to eat a simple but hearty breakfast. The beach had already filled up by the time we were ready to sunbathe. We spent the entire day on the beach, going down to the water a couple times. Do you want to stay for a drink? I'd love to, but if I stay, I don't want to leave. She walked over to me and said, Go home and change your clothes, she whispered. Come back and have a drink and stay the night. I ran into the house, threw out my things, quickly packed my bag, grabbed the essentials and rushed to her. When I, out of breath, knocked on the door, she opened it and laughed as I caught my breath. Grabbing me by my shirt, she dragged me inside, slammed the door shut and pushed me back onto the couch. The next morning she made me breakfast, and we spent the day just lying around her apartment. Any silence was comfortable. Take your time, Jenny, I whispered. We have all the time in the world. I knew I was already in love with her, and I sensed she was feeling the same way. The only problem was that I hoped it wasn't a withdrawal. I had just recently left my wife of 20 years and had fallen in love with the first woman I saw. But I wanted to think it was fate that had brought us together. There was a reason we ended up at the supermarket that day. We didn't text constantly during the day because she was busy teaching, but we talked every night. The guys at work knew I was now seeing someone, and I let my family in Sydney know I had met someone special. My dad called and kept me up to date with Kylie. Apparently, she was on the verge of moving out. She was still trying to find me, but no one would tell her anything. She thought I was still in Sydney and hoped she would eventually meet me. Wednesday night couldn't come fast enough. Jennifer had prepared a sumptuous dinner that was delicious and hearty, and the dessert she made for us struck a chord with me. Patting myself on the stomach, I said, It is often said that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. I love you, she whispered. Turning to kiss her, I couldn't help but smile. I love you too, I whispered back. Isn't it too soon? Not at all, Jenny. If that's how we feel about each other, then that's how it is. I felt it on our first date over a cup of coffee. I knew I'd met the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And I mean, if you want to be closer to your kids, I'll go with you. Are you sure? It's a big decision. There's nothing keeping me here, Mark. My parents are still healthy. My sister is happily married. I won't make a decision right now, but my heart says I should come with you. I'd love to meet your children. They'll be here for Christmas. Then you will all come to spend Christmas with my family. That night she visited my apartment for the first time. She called it a bit bachelor, but it was clean and neat, though she understood why I kept it simple, since it was only a temporary place where I would be living. At the mention of marriage, she blushed and turned away. Gently taking her wrist, I admitted that I was already thinking about it too. Jenny, I can't remember the last time I felt this much love for Kylie. I'm not saying that because she broke my heart and cheated on me. Maybe all these years we've been on a roll. Maybe it's because it's something new. Maybe it's just because I'm older and have more life experience. But I love the hell out of you, Jennifer Morris. And one day I want to be Jennifer Williams, she whispered back. For the next few weeks, life was bliss. We weren't separated for a single night, although truth be told, we spent more nights at her apartment rather than mine, as her apartment was much nicer to be in. She spoke to my father on the phone more than once, and I kept my kids in the loop, but they didn't want to talk until they met her in person. After calling my son the week before Christmas, I had to ask about his mother and what she was doing. I told her I wouldn't be here for Christmas. I think she guessed you weren't in Sydney. Lottie hates her, Daddy. I mean, pure hatred. She's spoken to her once since you left, and since that phone call, she's practically stopped talking to her. I talked to your sister last night. She'll be here in a couple days. What about Grandpa and Naomi? I'll talk to them when I get back to Sydney. Jenny will probably come with me. We'll need to get her a job and buy a place as close as possible so she doesn't have to commute. Are you sure you don't want to stay there, Dad? Lottie and I have been talking, and we're both considering moving there to be closer to you. I know your sister is thinking about it too. Jennifer listened and took my hand, squeezing it. Are you sure about this, Steve? You're going to leave behind all your friends and family. You're more important, Dad. Trust me, when Lottie gets here in a couple days, she'll be sure to mention it. And her husband will be in favor of it too. He hates living in Sydney. I glanced at Jennifer, unable to hide my surprise. I'll still need to go back to make sure the divorce goes through. Don't make any hasty decisions, Steve. I know how it sounds, but my decision to leave your mother the way I did was planned in advance. Oh, I'm more than aware of that, Dad. As far as I'm concerned, to hell with her. She's still trying to convince people that she didn't do anything wrong and that it was your own fault for leaving. Jennifer came with me to the airport the day my daughter arrived. She took her husband Tom with her, but as soon as Charlotte saw me, she dropped her things and ran to me. It was like those days when I used to pick her up from school, and she was so happy to see me. She cried again for a few minutes, and when I introduced her to Jennifer, both of them were soon in tears. I looked over to Tom and shrugged helplessly. The next day, my son surprised me by knocking on my apartment door. "Daddy," he exclaimed, and we hugged. The bastard gave me a big hug, and we both had to wipe our cheeks as I led him inside to introduce Jennifer. "Well, at least he looks a lot like you," she said. I knew what she meant, but I'd already done the DNA test. Kylie hadn't cheated on me this early in our relationship, but I still needed reassurance. Later that morning, I drove the five of us to Jennifer's parents' house. The trunk was full of gifts, and I dropped them all off. Her mother fell in love with my daughter in 2 minutes, and my son, I'm sure, was accepted by them as one of their own grandchildren, just as they accepted me as their son. I called my father through an online video service so we could exchange Christmas wishes. My brother, his wife, my sister, and her husband, and their children celebrated Christmas with him. Kylie had long since left our former home and moved in with her parents. The news that surprised me was that her affair partner was kicked out of the house by his wife, who used evidence to get him fired for gross misconduct. Apparently, my wife was holding on to her job literally by a thread, but was demoted and also lost several mutual friends who couldn't forgive her for cheating on me. It was a great day. My kids took tons of pictures for their social media accounts. I had long since lost interest in such things, considering them a waste of time. But soon I started getting messages from a few old friends who contacted my dad, asking if he knew my number. Many were curious to know what happened, so I answered simply. Others gave me information about Kylie, but I replied that it just didn't matter. As soon as the 12 months were up, I would file for divorce and return to Sydney just to make sure it went into effect. Christmas with Jennifer and her family was wonderful. When she mentioned that she was coming to Sydney with me, I told her that we would be staying in Adelaide, and someone from my family would be joining us instead. Her face lit up, and I brought her almost to tears when I finally gave her the gift I wanted. It was too early to propose since I was still technically married, so I bought her a gorgeous necklace and bracelet. She immediately put them on and whispered that she would wear them as often as she could. After we ate a big lunch, her father offered me a beer, and we ended up in his garage where he put an old sports car on wheels. I haven't seen Jenny this happy in a long time, Mark. Partly I think leaving Adelaide would do her good. But, would you be happy to stay here forever? I'll stay here for her, and my children will move here to be closer. How soon can you finalize the divorce? A few months at the most. I've been honest with Jenny about everything from the beginning. I understand she's been doing nasty things to you. Yes. Maybe up to 6 months, although I only had concrete proof in the last few weeks before I pulled the pin. He shook his head. Hell, I've read about all this cheating nonsense. Why get married if you can't keep your legs closed? Ever heard of cuckolds? Judging by the look of disgust on his face, he knew exactly what it was. Yeah, I'm not sure that's what Kylie meant, but it's one of the new bullshit things. Same thing with all these people, and wanting a free relationship, so you can cheat while keeping your conscience clear. Honestly, if my wife asked me to do something like that, I'd be in jail. How much disrespect is there in asking someone to do that? Jenny's ex-husband here was both cheating and abusive. What? He put a hand on my shoulder. She barely knew about the cheating, but he was doing it with everyone who moved. He squeezed my shoulder. She loves you, Mark. Just don't break her heart. Please. I'm not sure I can handle another call like that from my little girl. He sipped from his bottle and, looking away, added quietly, I almost destroyed it, Mark. I love her more than anything in the world, Daddy. He grinned, already calling me sin. I've been hurt badly myself, so we both carry the wounds in our hearts and souls. We help each other. We stayed until late afternoon and my daughter drove us home as I had too much to drink. Back at my apartment, the kids went to bed and Jennifer dragged me to our bedroom. If it was good, she enjoyed New Year's Eve even more. I told my kids to have fun while I walked her to a hotel downtown. After dinner and drinks, I escorted her back to our room where there was a bottle of champagne and a few appetizers. Any wishes for the new year? I inquired. Not just one. Would you like to hear them? Sure. I want you to live here with me. Deal. I want you to propose to me as soon as you get your divorce. I'm already looking at rings. She clung to me even tighter. I want a baby, she whispered. Jennifer, we'll get married and have a family together. My children left a few days later. I was reluctant to let them go, but once I explained that I would probably stay in Adelaide if they wanted to join me, they promised to start exploring their options. I called my father and told him the same thing. He said I had to make the best choice for myself, but he was happy where he was with Naomi. But he would, of course, visit me when he could. The next few months passed in bliss. Eventually, I applied for an apartment lease and moved in with Jennifer. I won't say it was one of those fairy tale romances. After all, it was real life. But I don't remember myself happier. We were a true team in everything about our lives. She knew that the specter of my divorce loomed on the horizon, and at times still lingered in my mind. We both still had trust issues, but we agreed to always talk about any problems without giving the other a reason to think we were doing anything wrong. Our lives were great, and we never stopped seeing each other. Just enjoying her presence made me feel better about myself. She made me strive to be a better man, perfect in her eyes. As for Jennifer, she showed me so much love that I had already bought an engagement ring by the time I was ready to return to Sydney. During the flight, she was more nervous than I was because she knew there were still potential banana skins. My dad met us at the airport along with my siblings and kids. We would stay with my dad while the divorce was being finalized. I had already filed the papers, but the lawyer informed me that Kylie was trying to contest the divorce. Sitting with Jennifer in his office, I was shocked that she was even trying to prevent it. I haven't seen her in 12 months, I stated. I followed the letter of the law. I can even prove that I have lived in Adelaide for the last year, and no judge will listen to her arguments, and no counseling will be forced. I assume Jennifer is your partner? Kylie cheated on me. That's the original reason. Now I have a more compelling reason to divorce her. Once we're divorced, I'll propose to Jenny and we'll get married as soon as possible. We plan to have children after the divorce, Jennifer added. Okay, I'll talk to her lawyer and find out what she wants. There's really not much she can do, but a smart lawyer will be able to fight it. 3 days later, I heard from my attorney. Kylie would sign her name to the divorce agreement, so the petition would be joint, and therefore the case would proceed without delay if I agreed to talk to her one last time. I discussed this with Jennifer, who supported me whatever I chose to do. My attorney suggested that I just talk to her to get things settled. My father agreed. You're with Jennifer now, son, he stated. You're getting married, starting a new family, and your kids will be with you in Adelaide soon. Are you still angry with her? Not really. I've gotten over it. I guess you haven't. It's her own fault and I understand why I don't want to see her, but let her speak her mind, and then just put it all behind you. Okay. I'll talk to my lawyer and he'll sort it out. The very next week we found ourselves in court. My lawyer explained that once the meeting was finalized and she signed the papers, the judge would be ready to sign off on our divorce and I would be a free man 1 month and 1 day after the judge issued the divorce decree. I hadn't seen Kylie since the night she left for her date. She was waiting in the room when Jennifer and I approached my attorney. He explained that Kylie was inside with her attorney and no one else. Taking Jennifer's hand, I led her and the lawyer into the room. Kylie looked up in shock when she saw that I had entered with another woman, barely glancing at her. I guided Jennifer to a vacant chair and pulled it out, as always, making sure she was comfortable while I sat down in the chair in the middle, my lawyer to my left, taking Jennifer's left hand in my right hand. I made our hands rest on the table in full view of everyone. She pulled her chair as close to mine as possible and rested her head on my shoulder. Finally, I looked at Kylie. To be honest, she looked like shit. I'd heard often enough that Kylie's life hadn't been easy since I'd left her. I had no sympathy for her in the slightest. She had made a choice that had cost her everything. She had no contact with her daughter at all. Our son barely spoke to her at all. My whole family cut off all contact with her. And from what I heard, even her own family was disappointed, but felt they had to accept her once my father kicked her out of the house. Okay, have your say, Kylie, so we can get this divorce over with. I have my own life I'd like to start, and you are in the past where you belong. Who is she? She asked quietly. Who? The woman at your side. That's Jennifer Morris. As soon as our divorce is finalized, I will propose to her, and one day she will be Jennifer Williams. And I will naturally say yes to his proposal, because I want nothing more than to be his wife and the mother of his future children. I smiled for a moment, though I didn't take my gaze away from Kylie's eyes. As soon as she says yes, we'll organize a simple wedding ceremony. With any luck, by the time we're married, she'll be carrying our child. I knew it hurt to hear all this. I still knew my soon-to-be ex-wife, and the pain in her eyes was real. You recovered very quickly, she stated. I wasn't the one who cheated, Kylie. It was you. I remember leaving evidence. You never gave me an explanation. I left that night, and you never said anything. You didn't fight for me. I didn't have to fight for you because I was your damn husband. So in the end, you weren't worth fighting for. You cheated on me, Kylie. You showed your true colors after 20 years together. I remember our talks about monogamy and fidelity. I warned you that if you turned out to be like my mother, I wouldn't hesitate to leave. All you've done is make my decision easier. Do you even regret what you did? Don't bother answering that because you don't. You only regret getting caught, not proving that our marriage was nothing but a damn sham. And you're a worthless whore, just like my own mother. Her lawyer cleared his throat. I stared at him. Back off if you don't like what I'm saying. She wants to talk. Fine. I have the right to speak too. I made a mistake. Treason isn't a mistake. Treason is a series of decisions you made. I don't care if he seduced you or if you went out on purpose. The simple fact is that you slept with him and therefore lost any right to call me your husband. It was just sex. And there it is. The very phrase that so many sluts use to justify their decision. I'm sorry, but most people equate sex with love. And considering you were my wife, I was the one you should have been doing it with, not some damn idiot you were working with. We talked about this before we were married, Kylie. You just don't remember. I warned you again what would happen if you cheated on me. You forget that my mother cheated too. As soon as I pulled my head out of my ass, I knew what you were doing, so I just had to gather proof. If you had said no that night, would you still have left? Yes. I would have left either way. But I would have left in a different way. What you did that night was so damn disrespectful. You deserved everything that happened afterward. You took all our money. Consider it payment for 20 wasted years. I paused and shook my head. No, that's not really fair, right? You gave me our 2 children. It wasn't a waste. I also verified that they were mine. That upset her. I never cheated on you then? No. You only turned into a whore afterward. You sold our house. No. I gave it to my father. It's still in his name, and he rents it out. He's already told me he's going to sell it and give me most of the money so I can buy another house where I live now. You didn't even give me a chance, Mark, because you sure as hell didn't deserve one, Kylie. Where do you live now? None of your business. I don't want you to know that information. The day I left, you stopped mattering to me. Our children are grown and can choose who they want to be with on special days, whether it's birthdays or holidays. She fell silent as she knew nothing she said would make me change my mind. Just sign the papers and move on with your life, Jennifer stated. He hasn't seen you or spoken to you in 12 months. He's come to terms with it. He loves me and I love him. We're going to get married, start our own family and grow old together. You chose to leave him. I'm glad I was the one who caught him, plugged him, whispered that everything would be okay and I would never let him down. He owns my heart and I know I own his. I didn't mean to. She met my eyes and I saw tears. I kept my composure. Water fireworks wouldn't work on me this time. I still love you, Mark. Good for you. I don't care, Kylie, I replied coldly. The tone almost made her jump. I don't hate you anymore. Don't let the cold tone fool you. I just don't care about you anymore. You stopped being my problem the day you let another man do this. We sat in silence until her lawyer finally cleared his throat. Kylie, this is clearly going nowhere, her lawyer stated. Just sign the papers and end this farce. He has clearly gone further as he intends to remarry. No judge worth his salt would stand in the way of that. Your marriage is over. Your children are grown. You no longer have any property in common. It's over. Do the decent thing, sign the papers, and move on with your lives. He took the papers out of the folder and placed them in front of her, then held out a pen to her. Kylie met my gaze, and that's when she cried. I knew her enough to know she was genuinely upset. Wiping her cheeks, she gingerly took the proffered pen with a trembling hand and looked over the papers. At the very bottom, she signed and dated. Is my presence in the courtroom necessary? I asked my attorney. No, Mark. You are free to go. You will receive the divorce decree in the mail. Good. Then we're done. Rising to her feet, Jennifer took my hand, and I led her out of the room. I'm sorry, Mark, I heard her say. I'll always love you. I appreciated the apology, even though it no longer meant anything. It was too little and too late. But as for the last 3 words, I'm pretty sure she still loved me, but I didn't care. The woman I loved was now holding my hand, and in a month and a few days she would be my bride. Walking outside, my father, Naomi, Steve, and Charlotte were waiting for us at the cafe. Gesturing to my head, we walked onwards to the nearest pub as I was panting for a drink. After buying a mug each, we sat down at a table and I explained what the conversation was about. They cheered up when I admitted that it was probably more me talking, laying out everything I wanted to say. What did she look like? Inquired Charlotte. Like shit. Definitely looks her age, if not older. Definitely deserved the upgrade, Jennifer whispered in my ear. Did she sign the papers? My father asked. Nodding, we clinked glasses and sipped our beers. I went through the same shit with your mother. I'm sure everything Kylie told you. She tried to tell me too. She wasn't trying to blame me, Dad. Mom was accusing you of working too hard. Did she try to justify it? Inquired Stephen. Yeah, the old line. It was just sex. What is it with these promiscuous women claiming it was just sex? Charlotte wondered almost to herself. I married my husband and wouldn't dream of leaving him just for that. If I want it, I turn to my husband and achieve it. She stopped and blushed, realizing that she had just said that in the presence of her father and grandfather. We exchanged glances and burst into laughter. Well said, girl. Well said, exclaimed my father. And those are words to live with. Your grandfather doesn't stand a chance, Naomi declared. And if he needs a little chemical help, he knows there are other things he can use. Naomi, that's my grandfather, exclaimed Charlotte. He's not dead and neither am I. I'm 65 years old and still more than capable, objected Naomi. Your grandfather met me at the right age. But once we were together, we made a promise to be good to each other. We both had failed marriages due to infidelity. I'm just glad it's almost over, I admitted. I don't like being another divorcee, but like I said in the room, infidelity is unforgivable. Fair play to those who choose to make a relationship work. Perhaps if you kids were 10 years younger, I would have felt trapped. But then I looked at my dad. It was a struggle, but he always supported me. We stayed in Sydney for a few more days while I discussed with my family their plans. Charlotte and Tom immediately agreed to come to Adelaide. Stephen was still assessing his options, but would likely join us. To my surprise, my sister offered to join us, inviting her to dinner when she arrived alone. I learned that her marriage had also broken up. You can stay with us while you work things out, Jennifer offered. Any family would welcome you. You are my family now, and my family is yours now too. I'm selling the house here, and we're going to capitalize on it, I added. Housing prices in Adelaide are a lot more reasonable than here, so we're going to buy a big house. With rooms to fill with little people, Jennifer suggested, taking my hand and placing it on her stomach. I'll be carrying our first child soon. How many do you want? Mark? As many as you want, Jenny. I love being a father. A month later, I received a divorce decree stating that my marriage to Kylie Daniels, since she didn't keep her last name, was officially over. I never heard from her again, but rumor had it that she left Sydney within 6 months of our divorce. According to Stephen, who was the only one still in touch with her, she headed north to Queensland to start over. After that, I just stopped asking and Stephen stopped telling me as I no longer cared what she was doing. 2 days after receiving the divorce decree, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach in front of our families. She could barely get a word in edgewise, nodding as I slipped the engagement ring on her finger. 6 months later, we were married on the same beach, as our new home was only a few hundred meters away. As she walked towards me in her wedding dress, no one could fail to notice her baby, but my future wife just glowed as her father led her towards me. Taking her hand, we couldn't contain our smiles as we turned to face the celebrant. My dear ones, we are gathered here today. Epilogue: I'm a year away from retirement, and life couldn't be better. Jennifer and I have been married for almost 20 years, and we are still as happy today as the day we met. Our first date, our first lovemaking, all those first meetings leading up to our wedding day. 6 months after returning to Adelaide after that trip to Sydney, my daughter and son were living in Adelaide. My daughter is still married to Tom and has 3 grandchildren. My son is married to a wonderful man, and they have adopted 2 children. My father and Naomi moved in with us in Adelaide a year after the divorce, where he lived for almost 10 years before passing away peacefully in his sleep. Naomi was heartbroken, and the first thing we did was insist that she live with us. She resisted for a while until she realized our house was huge, and we ended up building her a granny apartment, so she could still have her independence. My sister moved in with us in Adelaide almost immediately after my husband left, taking the children with her. Like her brother, she was a victim of infidelity, and he didn't fight back when she took his children. We found her a place to live when she stayed with us for a couple months. She ended up marrying one of my coworkers and good friends, and they have been happily married for 15 years now. My brother stayed in Sydney and was the only one who kept in touch with our mother. At the age of 60, I learned that she had passed away. Having had no relationship with her for almost 40 years, I was unable to feel any sorrow upon learning of her death. Jennifer suggested that we attend her funeral after all. Again, it was about being a better person. So we all flew to Sydney to attend the funeral. I was surprised to learn that she had remarried and practically adopted her husband's children as her own. They weren't shocked to learn of our existence, but were surprised that she didn't admit to being completely estranged from 2 of her 3 children. We could have explained why we were estranged, but funerals are not the time. We just said we were here to pay our last respects before returning home. As there were no relatives left in Sydney, my brother moved in with us in Adelaide within a year. As for Jennifer and I, we ended up having 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My older daughter and son were thrilled to have siblings and enjoyed babysitting, even though Jennifer and I didn't get out much. But we still loved each other deeply, always cared about each other's companionship, never went to bed irritated, and our lives are still as vibrant today as they were when we first slept together. I look back on my life in the period when I was divorced. I'm sure there are those who would have preferred that I cave to my ex-wife. But what would have been the point? The fact that I left without saying a word actually hurt her much more, and I kept quiet for a year until I went back just to make sure the divorce went through. She knew my thoughts on fidelity and broke the contract. As for those who believe in reconciliation, I can't agree with that either. If your wife cheats and you find the strength to forgive her, that is your business. But trust is broken, and can it ever be fully restored? I don't believe it can. You will spend the rest of your life in suspicion and resentment, and divorce is probably inevitable in the end. Instead, I went down a road that is often not traveled. There was no real revenge, at least not to the point of burning everything to the ground, but there was no chance of reconciliation either. I just walked away and decided to move on without Kylie. I found Jennifer, my one true soulmate. I still maintain that meeting in the supermarket was fate. I'm not religious, but I'm sure there are old world religions that talk about gods of fate. Are you ready, Mark? I turned around and saw my wife looking simply gorgeous in a gorgeous red ball gown. I see you still have the old magic. Any word on the children? They are either on their way or preparing to leave. And the youngsters? They'll do just fine without us for one evening, unless they burn the place to the ground. So we have time to fool around? Of course. I love you, husband. I love you, wife. Many more years of happiness? I hope so. I'll tell the kids we're not staying long. They'll know why. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel, and watch the next video.